Hello, everyone. Paul and I are thrilled to have award-winning author Tananarive Due with us tonight. Tananarive teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She's been a leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years and has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award. Her writing has been included in numerous Best of the Year anthologies. Her books include The Reformatory, winner of the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, Chautauqua Prize, Bram Stoker Award, Shirley Jackson Award, World Fantasy Award, and a New York Times notable book. She's also the author of The Wishing Pool and Other Stories, Ghost Summer Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. Tananarive was an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. She and her husband slash collaborator, Stephen Barnes, wrote A Small Town for season 2 of Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone on Paramount Plus, and 2 segments of Shudder's anthology film Horror Noir. They also co-wrote the Black horror graphic novel The Keeper, illustrated by Marco Finnegan. Due and Barnes co-host a podcast, Life Writing, Write for Your Life. She and her husband live with their son, Jason. Welcome to Tananarive.
Thank you. Very excited to be here. Hello, writers and readers.
Well, it's great to have you here, and we're very excited to hear you read from this book. I finished it this week, The Reformatory, fabulous book for anyone who is into history and horror and everything in between. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand it over to you. And then once you're done, Paul and I can come back on the screen and we can have a couple questions and answers from
Sure.
the group.
What I think I'll do is talk a little bit about the book for context before I actually do the reading. And if this share function works, I actually have a presentation. Well, maybe it didn't work, that I can share. There we go. Well, I know what I'm doing. So this is one of the most exciting moments of my life. When I was doing an Instagram live, someone mentioned in the comments that Stephen King was tweeting about my book. So it would be like if I were doing this event and someone commented that Stephen King was tweeting about my book, and then I had to sort of hustle over to another window and see what's going on over there. I don't use Twitter anymore, full disclosure, but this was very exciting for me since a lot of what I learned about how to write horror was at the feet of obviously Stephen King. And it has won more awards than any book I've ever written, which I'm not saying primarily to brag, but it does stir and move me and also make me very curious about what it is about this book that is affecting people so deeply. I've been publishing since 1995. And there's not even a close second place in terms of the response that the Reformatory has gotten. And maybe it's because it came from a very deep place. Maybe that it took me 7 years to write, which is also longer than I've ever spent working on a novel. But I am just thrilled that this story that is rooted in my real life family history has found so many readers and captivated so many readers. And I'll just tell you a little bit about it. This is my late mother, Patricia Stevens Due. She was a civil rights activist and really the first horror fan in my life, too. So I don't want to just skew it to the civil rights. But I think as a lot of people are beginning to connect, for the Black community in the United States, horror and history kind of go hand in hand. As I said in Shudder's documentary Horror Noir, Black history is Black horror. And this is part of the reason. My mother was a college student back in the 60s. Basically, she was arrested here just trying to get seating at a segregated movie theater. And on and on. I mean, lunch counter, you name it, register to vote. I mean, there was always a reason that the very simple demands of citizens of this country for equal rights were met with violence and were met with imprisonment. And my mother is wearing dark glasses in these photos because she was tear gassed as a 20-year-old college student. And to be honest, she never fully recovered from that tear gassing. She wore dark glasses indoors almost exclusively for 80% of the time, for the rest of her life, to the point where her dark glasses are on display at the Florida Archives in Tallahassee, Florida. So that is sort of the root of my understanding of she loved horror, and I think she used it as an outlet for her own pent-up trauma, but also having it kind of in your bones, in your genetic memory, that lack of safety, that lack of community support, the idea that you are an interloper, that you do not belong, and having to fight through that, in so many aspects of life, which I think is something that I unpack in a lot of my work, and the Reformatory just happens to be a very specific incident. This is me posing in front of what's left, or was left when I took this picture, of the Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida, which was an institution that was operating between, let's call it 1900 and 2011. When I was on book tour, I met a survivor who had been there in the 90s and was shaking like a leaf when he met me, because his trauma was still living with him. And the very same day I had interviewed, he happened to be a white young man, but earlier that day I had been on the phone with a Black survivor who was about my dad's age, in his 80s. And he was still living in his trauma, to the point where the first words out of his mouth were, "It still hurts." So this institution spawned so much terror among young men. It was a segregated institution. There were white kids there and Black, mostly poor, and Black kids there, obviously also mostly poor, who were forcibly put to work, who were shot at when they ran away or tried to run away. This is the makeshift cemetery at Boot Hill. If you've read Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys, there's a reference to Boot Hill on the very first page, which is why I haven't been able to get past that first page, because my great uncle was literally buried at Boot Hill. And it was because of the personal nature of this story that I knew I had to write about it. That's my dad, John Dorsey Due Jr. If you read The Reformatory, you know I named a character after him, the civil rights lawyer, John Dorsey. Well, my dad is was a civil rights attorney who practiced in the 1960s. So I got actually some pointers from him on how to write my scene in the court, the judge's chamber. For example, like, "Dad, when it's 1950 and you're in the Jim Crow South, Black people really don't have any rights, And the premise of my novel, I'll stop sharing for just a second. The premise of my novel is that a 12-year-old boy who was just on his way to school with his older sister, Gloria, who's 17, got into sort of a schoolyard tussle. The older kid pushes him. Robert kicks the kid back. It's the kind of thing that honestly might not even be noteworthy if it happened in a school today, even though our schools are much more heavily policed today. So sometimes students do get arrested for these kinds of events. But in the world of this story, Robert kicked the 16-year-old son of a very rich white planter, the McCormick family, and there is hell to pay. He's sentenced to 6 months in this notorious reformatory. And in his naive child's mind, he's just afraid to go because he's heard it's haunted. Plus 6 months is a huge amount of time when you're 12. Like, till Christmas, it's summer, that's till Christmas. That's almost an incalculable amount of time for a 12-year-old. But he's most worried because he's heard that the reformatory is haunted. And I'm doing kind of a sleight of hand in this novel, because I am a horror writer. And I knew right away, after interviewing survivors of the Dozier School, that I had to write about this place. Like, from the very first time my dad and I went to a meeting, my dad loved the meeting, so he was always happy to go with me to these meetings. When I heard the testimony of men who had not known each other, some of them Black, some of them white, they're during different periods, but all of them older, recalling horrific beatings in a whipping shed that was called the White House, which I've kind of insidiously named the Fun House in the Reformatory, just to make it even worse. The irony of calling a terrible place like that the Fun House. but I was compelled to write it. I thought about nonfiction briefly because I had done that memoir with my mother, and this was her uncle, and I don't think she ever knew he existed. By the way, a few months after she died, I heard from the state of Florida, the I think it was called the state attorney's office for the state of Florida, which technically was Pam Bondi's office, although it was not Pam Bondi who called. It was someone in her office who was actually very empathetic, who said, "Listen, you may have a relative who's buried at this school, and we're looking for permission from family members to begin exhuming remains," which was, something that, again, these crosses here were not erected by the school to honor the children's lives that had been lost at their hands. By the way, it was Boy Scout troops who just knew that this was a burial ground, and it was one of their projects for a good deed to put up crosses sort of randomly, almost, to commemorate these lost lives. And the whole thing of it, the whole idea that you could, like, my uncle was a great uncle, rather, was 15 in real life when he was sent there, and he never came home. He was stabbed to death, and he's buried there at Boot Hill. And the whole point for me of writing the Reformatory was to give him a better story. He had been forgotten by his family. I don't think my mother knew that her father had a brother. First of all, she never mentioned it if she did know. She was born a couple years after Robert Stevens died. And I do think that her father, who was physically abusive toward my grandmother, I think it explains a few things about his personality when you know that he had a brother that he lost at the age of 15 that was sent into sort of the jaws of this facility, like so many other young people. They found more than, I believe, 55 or 60 sets of remains here. Sometimes obviously they would die of natural causes, but suspiciously, I would say, there were many other reasons that these young people died here, trying to run away, dying from exposure. As I said, I've seen accounts that people would shoot at them as they were running, which I believe it. No one has ever been arrested or even posthumously accused of murder or sexual assault, which I understand was also rampant at this facility. And the idea that my great uncle had just sort of disappeared into this hole in the ground, forgotten by his own family. Well, not forgotten, I'm sure, by his parents. He had a namesake, an uncle of mine from another line of the family, who did not even know for whom he was named. So that's the kind of erasure I'm talking about. And the reason it happened, I would suppose, is because it was so painful and they felt so helpless. What do you do when you're up against the state? What do you do when you're up against these forces that are so much bigger? That's me with my family. And my son was so young when I was still working on this book. He's 21 now. So the book took me a while. This was real inspiration for me. I took a lot of inspiration from photographs. I don't know how many of you were writing historicals, but historical photos are absolutely essential to me as a part of my writing process. And I will tell you that this young man who is in the center of this photo became my kind of model for the character I named Blue. And the man to the left of him, who's very, he's wearing his three-piece suit in holding the book, is my model for Mr. Crutcher, one of the dorm masters. But also the very insidious thing about this photo is that this is at a burial. And the more you know and learn about the Dozier School, they used to actually force these young people to bury other children. Like one survivor talked about how having to help bury his own brother. And those were the kinds of casual stories that I would hear. And it was because these stories were so horrific and because they dealt with children. That's my husband, Stephen Barnes, hugging my son the first day we were there. I knew I had to tell Robert's story. Jason got to do a little sifting through the soil. He didn't find any bones, but he did find a spoon. And he was very, very curious about what happened. But I sometimes wonder if that was necessarily a good thing for me to do, bringing him to this place when they started exhuming or trying to exhume the bodies. old pictures of the dorms. You know, these were kids on their way to do farm work. I mean, this facility was providing corn for the county. I mean, it was a big operation. When I say school, they call it a school. It was a work camp, is really, with classes is what it was. And it was sprawling. It was huge. It employed great numbers of people from the community. They marched in the Christmas parade. They had their own football team. And one of the memoirs, one of the white survivors wrote about how being a football star was the reason he was held there so long, because they could hold you until you were 21, if you can imagine such a thing. And I had to figure out how to tell the story. So it was like, and this is the memorial, by the way, that just went up in Mariana. I believe it was last year. And just seeing these images re-triggered me. Like, people kept sending me pictures of the memorial. One of them in the far right corner is the bed where they used to tie the boys before they beat them. And it has like bloody handprints on it. I was like, thank you for the pictures. I really need to put that research phase behind me, because this was such a traumatic experience working on this book. I'm gratified that it has reached so many people and that so many people enjoy it. But wow, was it hard to write. The only thing that kept me going was that I knew what my ending was. And as I said, I won't spoil it if you haven't read it. But I knew that my ending was a better ending than what Robert got in real life. And that was my North Star when I struggled to keep up even a sentence a day writing quota, which is what my husband and I talk about on our podcast. Even if you just do your project at a sentence a day, sometimes that sentence was outlining. Sometimes that sentence was just rewriting a sentence that wasn't working. But I finally, because of COVID, because when I was fearful that I might actually die without finishing the book after I'd been working on it for more than 5 years, that got me serious. That got my page quota 5 to 7 pages a day, I think, was the quota I put myself on. Did not always hit it, but I had a chart up on my wall. So I couldn't lie to myself about my progress. A 0 is a 0. And then if I have a 5, I get a smiley face. So I couldn't lie to myself either about the fact that I was working on my book or I wasn't working on my book. It was right there on the chart. I could see every day. And that was what it took. It really took that push to get the book finished. And I'm so glad I did, because, and there were times I almost gave up on it, honestly. I was very worried when I heard about the Nickel Boys, because I'm a fan, obviously, of Colson Whitehead. And the idea that he was writing a novel set at literally the same facility that I was writing about, also in history, also with Jim Crow overtones, it was a little too close to home. I thought, well, will there be room for both of these stories? And honestly, my agent had to convince me to keep working on it. And I'll credit my agent for that, and my husband, obviously, but also Colson Whitehead himself, because back when I was on Twitter, and we were both on Twitter, I just had to ask him, are there any ghosts? I'm telling you, if he had said that this was magical realism like Underground Railroad, that might have been a wrap for me, to be perfectly honest. But he said, no ghosts, my friend. And that told me, okay, I maybe there is room. And the books are very different, but still, you can probably imagine, writers, that wasn't confidence inspiring. So in any case, I'm glad I stuck it out. And I think, given that background, I'll read a little bit from the Reformatory. And this will be from Robert's point of view. This novel actually has a dual point of view. One of the points of view is his sister Gloria, who's older. And then I may snatch a couple of passages from her voice, because it seemed like forever that I was stuck in the first 2 or 3 chapters of this novel when I first started writing it, writing and writing and rewriting Gloria's point of view. Like, I almost had it memorized. Like, so the afternoon that he's picked up on the road, or actually the afternoon of the event, he hasn't been picked up yet, but she knows in her heart that there will be repercussions for kicking Lyle McCormick. There's no way that, with a witness, Lyle McCormick's father saw it, and he's a very powerful planter in this town, and they're Black. And by the way, their father has been chased out of town because of his union organizing. So Gloria's point of view, very briefly, I'll read. I decided to make her voice. I'm not hewing 100% to the way they would speak. I do cheat that a bit with Robert. He's a very he has kind of a wisdom for a child. He's very observant, and he has a bit more wisdom than probably a typical 12-year-old. But with Gloria, I wanted to go for a little bit more poeticism, and to establish that she's bringing her intellect and her poeticism into the way she looks at the world. So this is how Gloria is responding to this incident on the road. Robbie kicked Lyle McCormick, and Red McCormick saw. Gloria's thoughts wouldn't let her sleep. Memories slapped at her as she lay in the bed her parents had shared, already an uneasy place to rest. Lyle McCormick's sour breath on her neck, Robbie's kick to Lyle's knee, his knee, and he wanted to play football for Florida State. Red McCormick storming over so quickly that he might have meant to snap Robbie's neck, and blue flames in Red McCormick's eyes as he boxed Robbie's ear, daring her to move or speak. What would Mama have done? They've also, by the way, lost their mother just in the past year to cancer. So they've been basically living on their own after their father was chased out of town. Mama had kept most of her childhood stories locked in her eyes. Mama's stories were unsuited for the ears of children, stories of evil without consequence and pain without cease, the unholy things that happen when God blinks, or maybe sleeps. Surely God sleeps sometimes, Gloria thought. The evidence of slumber was all around. Secretly, since Mama's passing, Gloria wrestled with her father's unshakable belief in God, but sometimes she made peace with the notion that Mama's cancer had come while God's eyes were shut. Mostly God's eyes are open, but God blinks. There's a hurricane, or blink, there's an orphan. Reverend Miles had never put it so plainly, but to Gloria, it was a truth as bright as summer sun. So that's Gloria's voice. She's got a little more lyricism and a little more wisdom than her younger brother. Robert, I feel like his superpower is that he's so young. I've always loved child protagonists, but this is the first novel, a solo novel, I should say, that I've written with child protagonists. And the thing I love about a child protagonist, especially in horror, and this is something we see in horror movies too, is that they are so much quicker to accept what's right in front of them, like what's before their eyes. And not to say that he wouldn't have needed many years of therapy after this situation, but I can guarantee you Robert deals better with his imprisonment at this place than I would have. Okay, yeah, he's like, from the minute he gets there. Well, first of all, he's a child, so he's playful. He wants to play with the knobs and the shiny car while the social worker's driving him there. That's one way he can kind of take his mind off of it. And children play. Children are looking for friends. He's always looking for, like, are there ways to get out of here? Like, from the minute he arrives, he's ready to run away. And so this is his first day. It hasn't been a great day. The black man who's called well, the warden was very scary. He met the warden, and the black man who calls himself a dorm master is almost as scary as the warden. He's getting no breaks from this guy. And he's already sensed that there was a fire here because he's very sensitive to spirits. He senses there's a fire here, and he can feel the pain. He can almost smell the smoke. And then he got beat up after class because he answered a question and the other kids thought he was showing off. So he's really struggling to kind of find his bearings between the spiritual realm, which nobody else seems to be able to sense except him, and then the social realm of trying to navigate relationships in a place full of, kids who are tougher than he is. He doesn't, I mean, no children belong here, but he definitely doesn't belong here. Okay, so finally now he's in the kitchen and he's met two boys who seem like maybe they want to be his friend. And that's the longer passage I'm going to read to you as they're washing the dishes and the boys are trying to show him the ropes. That's Mr. Crutcher, the tall boy said. He used to be real nice. Sure was. But not no more. If the water ain't hot enough, he'll put your head down in that sink. Robert stared after the man, trying to picture it. He didn't seem as mean as Boone. Nobody stays nice, the younger boy said, not unless they're like us. What you mean? Robert said. The boys looked at him as if his questions were silly. The younger boy giggled. Children, dummy, he said. Shut up, the taller boy snapped. How's he gonna know? The smaller boy still shook his head, chuckling to himself. The boys talked too fast and so softly that Robert had to crane his ear to hear them. His bad ear rang. How long you gonna be here? The small boy said. 6 months. It stung to say it. 6 months, that ain't too bad, the tall boy said. They exchanged names. The tall boy's name was Redbone, or just Bone. The smaller boy said he was called Blue because he was blue-black, and he surely was. Robert said his nickname was Robbie, but he wanted to be called Robert. He did not want to be Robbie here. We'll get you a better nickname, Blue promised him. Now, Blue is from the Caribbean, and when I try to do his voice, it sounds Irish. I apologize, but he's not Irish. I don't know why. Okay, Redbone and Blue finally got around to instructing Robert on his duties. 1 sink for plates, 1 for cups, 1 for forks and spoons. There were only 2 rules to live by, they said. 1, don't break the dishes. 2, don't leave grime or spots. Boys who made it past washing dishes could start cooking or mopping the floor. Boys who failed at washing dishes got sent out to the fields. Blue had never been to the fields, but Redbone said he'd worked on a thresher and never wanted to see corn on the cob again. Blue's family had sent him to Miami from the Bahamas when he was 8, but he'd been brought to the Reformatory after his grandmother died. He was waiting on an aunt to come get him from Bimini, but she kept getting delayed. Redbone gave Robert a knowing look as if to say, that ain't true. Redbone, who was from St. Augustine, had taken his neighbor's car joyriding when he was 10, and he'd been sentenced to 2 years. His sentence would be up in December, a month before Robert's. He might go home then, or he might get leased out to the peanut mill or one of the farms. He wasn't sure. The warden would decide based on his behavior record. Both boys looked grim at the mention of Warden Haddock. Robert didn't want to talk about him either. Robert listened to their stories between bouts of thoughtful scrubbing so he could be sure no grains of rice or dried food was stuck between the tines. The water scalded his palms bright red. Washing forks was the worst job, the boys had said. Forks trapped food out of reach. You're going to need to wash faster than that, Redbone said. 100 years faster, Blue said. That was when Robert looked up and saw him. Across the kitchen, Cleo was gone. That's the bully who beat him up earlier. Instead, a white boy in a chef's hat and a long white apron stood in his place. He stared dead at Robert as if he'd been waiting to be noticed. His hair was cut short like Blue's, the color of pale sand. He was thin and barefoot, maybe 12 or 13. Robert looked away fast. When trouble started with white boys, colored boys lost out. I thought it was only colored boys in the kitchen, Robert said. Redbone and Blue shrugged. Well, how come they let him in here like he's spying on us? Redbone and Blue stared blankly, so Robert gestured toward the vat with his chin. The white boy was still there, still staring. What white boy? Redbone said. Robert thought they were teasing him, but their faces said different. They didn't see the boy. They looked straight past him. He's right there, Robert said. You say so, Redbone said, and went back to washing. Robert squeezed his eyes shut tightly, opened them, and looked again. The boys stared on. Robert could see his cool blue eyes from across the room. He had never seen eyes so blue. A tiny clink rang as Redbone lifted a dripping plate he'd rinsed. Just tell him he ain't real, and he'll leave you be, he said, most times. Not real. The boy was as real as he was, casting a shadow against the large metal vat. Robert could see his freckles. Blue spoke, hushed. I've seen that white boy, the one with the knife. Heart speeding, Robert checked to see if the boy held a knife. He was relieved to see the boy's hands empty, hanging limply at his sides. He ain't got a knife, Robert said. Must be another one then, Blue said. He checked the plates he'd stacked for chips. White boys must have worked in the kitchen before. They keep coming back, Redbone said. I bet Haints get hungry, huh, Blue? Haints. Robert's heartbeat was thunder, but he couldn't look away. What did he see in this boy's face? He didn't seem angry. He didn't quite seem sad. His eyes reminded Robert of Mama's when she used to cling to his arm to keep him from pulling away when it was too hard to look at her dying. Redbone went on talking to Blue, unbothered. They must be hungry. They're punching open the rice and flour bags at night, and then we get blamed. That ain't right. If you're dead, stay dead, Blue said. They could be talking about rats or roaches. You're not real, Robert whispered to the boy, a test. As if Robert had shouted, the white boy turned to walk away, although he had nowhere to go except the back wall. A butcher's knife was buried in his back, the hilt lodged between his shoulders. The circle of blood was thick and black near the knife, soaking red down his back, leaving smudged footprints as he walked toward the wall. One stride, and he was gone, through the whitewashed bricks. Robert gasped. He! Robert clung to the counter to stay upright. His words withered. Yep, he heard Blue say, a tiny voice on the other end of a long tunnel. Told you, Bone, must be the one with the knife. And that is the excerpt from the Reformatory. So,
thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I can just go on and on talking about it. At what time would you like to do Q&A? Because it's a bit early for Q&A now, would you say?
It's up to you. If you want to talk some more, that's fine. Or we can jump into the Q&A.
Let me, I'll just get ahead of a few of the questions maybe and say what some of the things I wanted to accomplish with this book, besides honoring the name Robert Stevens. And one of the conceits in the story is that if you want to summon a haint, which is a Southernism, an African-American Southernism for ghosts and spirits, if you want to summon a haint, you say their full name, which is, of course, an echo of say their name, say her name in our contemporary times. I always wanted this to serve as sort of a microcosm of our national prison industrial complex, although I will say that in 1950, we were much less that than we are now. Ironically, I mean, that we didn't have the freedom. We had the Jim Crow laws. You had all kinds of like arrests for vagrancy just because, you know, people thought you should be working. Or, I mean, there were a lot of things stacked against Black people legally, but there were not as many Black people behind bars in 1950 as there are today, and certainly not children as there are today. And the police were not nearly as militarized. And I mean, if you look at some of even that civil rights photo I showed you of my late mother being arrested, as painful as that is for me to see as her daughter, I'll go back to it, I also can't help but notice how more polite the arrest feels compared to the way protesters are treated sometimes by police today. Not that people weren't tear gassed. And yes, in cases you even had fire departments hosing protesters down. So I'm not saying that all protest was more polite in the 1960s than it is today, but the police were far less militarized. And there's almost sort of a quaint bearing to a scene like this compared to if you've seen images on social media. I don't mean recent protests that are mostly white people or white women. I'm talking about the Black Lives Matter protests, okay? I'm talking about, oh my gosh, the Gaza protests. The way police treat nonviolent protesters today is very stark and violent compared to then. And I wanted this book not, oh, let me stop sharing. I wanted this book not just to be about the past, but like Afrofuturism, which is what I teach at UCLA, and anyone who's seen the movie Sinners, there's one scene, it's a musical scene, there's one scene, and I'm not even going to describe it, but if you've seen it, you know the scene I'm talking about, that is the visual representation of what Afrofuturism is, which is holding the past, present, and future in a single moment. right? So that was one of the things I wanted to accomplish with the Reformatory. It's set in the past, very firmly a historical novel, but I wanted it in conversation with the present and our current issue with mass incarceration and over policing of Black children and Black people and minorities in general. But also, Robert and other characters in this story have an eye toward the future. So there's a scene where one of the music instructors at the Reformatory gives shelter to the older sister. It's a little spoilery, but I won't say why, but gives shelter to the older sister, and she has a television set. So this is in 1950. Television is fairly new. She can turn on the TV and she can see the snow. And she says it was a gift from Louis Armstrong, of all people. But there's no station close enough for her to get a broadcast, right? So she's poised to meet the future, but the future hasn't quite arrived yet. And in the same way, there's a point in the story when Robert hears the fringes of a freedom song, a song. Now, this is a song that wasn't a freedom song. It wasn't part of any civil rights movement in 1950, but 1950 is right at the edge. Like, it's before Emmett Till. So 1955 is Emmett Till. And then we go to the Montgomery bus boycott, and then we get the student sit-in movement, and you get the voting rights protests, and all those things were going to happen, but they hadn't happened yet. What you had in 1950 was individuals standing up to the system, like Harry T. Moore, who appears in the book and was assassinated in 1951, roughly just a few months after Robert encounters him in this story. And Gloria, it's actually Gloria who encounters him, and Gloria doesn't have Robert's gift for seeing ghosts, but she has a little bit of this sort of a sense of prophecy. Like, she can tell if she meets someone who's about to die, she can feel it. So the future is sort of right at the tips of their tongues in this story. Like, there are these aspects of the future that we as contemporary readers know, oh man, if you just wait 10 years, there's going to be massive protests, but this hasn't happened yet. It's too early for that when this story takes place. So the Reformatory is Afrofuturism in that sense. A lot of people think of Afrofuturism as science fiction stories that are set in the future. But another version of Afrofuturism is Black fantasy stories. And this, as horror, is fantasy. And in this fantasy story, which happens to be a historical, the characters are in this moment, for me anyway, of like past, present, and future colliding in the story. And with that, maybe it is time for questions. And I'm just seeing your comments, by the way. Thank you for all your compliments on the reading. By the way, there's a beautiful audiobook for this. Janice Abbott Pratt does an incredible audiobook. I almost recommend it over reading the book because her voices are so good. I'm trying to channel her blue. She was the one who helped me understand what blue is supposed to sound like. And I actually had to do a reading with her present once, and it was very, very awkward for me.
Well, there's no reason that they can't read both, right? Get the audiobook and read the book.
Right, yeah.
Exactly.
Let me pull a question out of the chat, because I think we're going to get a lot of really great questions here. Here's one. As a Mexican American, sometimes I feel pushback or a sense of imposter syndrome when writing about themes that present my culture. As a fellow minority writer, how do you navigate the professional world of publishing while maintaining your cultural identity?
And Enrique, that is a great question. And this is something that I unconsciously wrestled with when I was at your stage. I actually didn't get an MA or an MFA. Well, I got an MA in English literature, but I never got an MFA. But I knew I wanted to be a writer. And from the time I was a child, I was writing blackety black stories. Like, I read Roots, and all of a sudden I had to write like a little handwritten novel. Lottie, Lottie, make us free, about a young African girl's experience in the Middle Passage. And I was writing about a Black girl trying to get in the Book of World Records. I mean, race had nothing to do with it, but it was a picture book. So I was coloring her to look like me. And then something started to happen as I got older, as I got through high school with more exposure to canon. And certainly by the time I got to college, a story started to feel like something that happened to a white male protagonist having an epiphany. That was what a story was feeling like. So that was what I started to write. I started to write about white men, every once in a while a white woman. I wasn't intentionally erasing my race. I didn't consciously say, well, I'm going to keep away from anything. No, I wasn't even doing it to sell, which is part of your question there, navigating them. It wasn't about the marketplace. It was literally, I had felt my own identity erased in my own mind, because that was what a story was. So let me write a story. And then I wondered why I wasn't publishing. I would send out these very generic, kind of bland stories where I wasn't accessing the deepest parts of myself. I wasn't accessing the most important things I wanted to say. Like my idea of a story when I was in college is a white housewife who's bored with her life and decides she wants to go back to the theater. Now, one thing and by the way, I'm sure there are many people who could write the hell out of that story. It's not that that's an illegitimate story. It's that that was not my life in any way, shape, or form. Like I was nowhere present in that story. I was nowhere present in many of the stories that I was writing during that period. And honestly, it took a couple things for me, and also notice it wasn't genre. So I was battling two fronts. The battle to understand that I wanted to write genre, which was highly frowned upon when I was in college. Hopefully it's a little better now. I have heard it's better now, and also race, which no one was telling me not to do it. But again, it was just sort of a vibe that I wanted to fit in. I wanted, of course you want to fit in. You want to write what feels like a story. Really quickly, two things turned me around. One was reading the book Mama Day by Gloria Naylor, which was the first time I had read a novel by a Black woman writing the metaphysical, where she was respected, right? Because I've always loved Stephen King. My mother loved horror. You would think, well, why weren't you writing horror? Because I didn't think it was a respected genre. I thought it would bring shame to my family's name or whatever, unconsciously. So Gloria Naylor's Mama Day really made a light bulb go off. And the genre piece, I'm going to find this guy for you guys. The genre piece happened because I interviewed Anne Rice. I worked for the Miami Herald for 10 years. I interviewed Anne Rice, and I've been telling this story for years. And finally, she got to hear the story. Someone published it in Locust magazine, and she actually tweeted in real time that she had just seen it. And I was like, so excited. But in the years when I've told the story, it was, I asked her how she responded to criticism that she was wasting her talents writing about vampires, because literally that was what people were writing about her in New York Times Magazine, that she was wasting her talents writing about vampires. That spoke to me. I said, how do you, I didn't tell her I wanted to be a writer like most journalists, but I was like, how do you respond to that criticism? And the way I tell the story is that she just laughed, and she told me her books were taught in universities. And then when you write genre, you can write about big themes like love and loss. I found what she actually said, and it has such a profound impact on me that I made it the kicker of the news story. And you'll know when you hear it why I started writing my first horror novel literally days after this interview with Anne Rice. And 9 months later, it was finished. This is Anne Rice telling me why she's proud to write horror. Everybody knows who Jane Eyre is. Mary Shelley, everybody knows who she is, and everybody knows who Frankenstein's monster is. These are great, powerful, heroic images that really allow you to go outside of yourself to really talk about questions that change you. That's what Homer did for the people when he went down to the corner tavern to listen to him. They didn't know Achilles. They didn't ever see the walls of Troy, but they sat there and listened to him talk about these enormous heroes and these enormous conflicts. And it was not just escape, but it was an escape that improves you. You go back feeling different. And that's what literature should do. That's what she told me. Now, I know I'm a little far afield of Enrique's question because we're talking about horror and not ethnicity. But I think that the things go hand in hand for anybody who's feeling like an outsider, whether it's because of genre or whether it's because of ethnicity, that you lean in. You lean in. One of the biggest horror writers working right now is an indigenous, Stephen Graham Jones. The Only Good Indians, The Buffalo Hunter is one of the best novels I've read in years. The Reformatory is getting so much love, where I've leaned more into race than probably in anything else I've ever written, you know, and I don't think anyone should be swayed by the political times either, because it's during these political times that I'm getting record sales on this book. So these things, in fact, are not mutually exclusive. I would say whether or not there are publishers who are actively looking for whatever kind of fiction it is you write, queer fiction, indigenous fiction, Latinx fiction, Black fiction. I mean, yeah, those editors exist, but that's not why you write. You write to tell your deepest stories. And it's when you tell your deepest stories that you will create your best work. I mean, period, as far as I'm concerned. That's not to say that you should never write the other. Like if you're Mexican and you're writing an Anglo character or a Black character, hey, all of us should practice writing the other. It's a beautiful thing, and we can tell powerful stories writing the other. But to purposely shy away because of fear of rejection in general, whether it's in your workshop group or in the marketplace, that is, I think, doing yourself a disservice, because you're not going to find that deepest spark within you. And it's not that every Black writer wants to write a novel set in the Jim Crow South. Believe me, I didn't think I wanted to write a novel set in the Jim Crow South. I probably wouldn't have if I hadn't come across the Dozier School. That was actually my nightmare when I was a young writer, that I'm not Toni Morrison. I'm not Alice Walker. That wasn't my upbringing. I grew up in the air-conditioned suburbs in Miami, Florida, right? So I had to come to that story. I had to live a little bit and learn a little bit more to come to that story. So there's no certain kind of story you should be writing from your background, but don't shy away from your background would be my answer to that.
Awesome. So thank you. You answered a lot of other questions I think that we had in the chat as well. When you were, which is wonderful. I think one of the other questions I want to go back to really quickly too was about your, formal editing process, and like, do you edit as you go, or do you write as much as possible and revise it later? And kind of piggyback off of that question as well, there's someone writing about writing about other cultures and backgrounds and stuff. You've encouraged it, but do you see a use in sensitivity readers? Do you have them yourself when you're writing about sensitive subject matter like this particular reformatory school? How about do you go addressing those things?
I didn't use sensitivity readers for this one, but when I wrote a short story for, was it for the Boston Review? Maybe, called Say Something, during the area where it was like see something, say something kind of thing. My son had witnessed a profiling episode at the park where a Black teenager was handcuffed for no reason. And I actually complained to our local police chief, who called me right away, which I thought she was Latina. So I thought, okay, sister, I got it. But what she said was a neighbor reported him, and it was see something, say something. And I'm like, but he was just existing. What that means, not say something. So anyway, I had to get that out of my system. And I wrote a short story about a white woman who witnessed that same thing and who did stand up and object and talk to the police officer about it. And I let a white writer friend of mine read it because I wanted, to be fair to her white sensibility as a character. And she really felt like I was a little too easy on her. But I am a big, big believer in sensitivity readers, a big, big believer in it. And my one caution would be that if you find yourself drawn to a character who is other, be sure it's not for tropey reasons, right? So an example of that would be a former student I had who introduced an indigenous character, and this was a white student, and I could sort of feel some alarm bells going off, that the entire purpose of this indigenous character was to be a spiritual magical guide and to guide her through the story with his magical ancient wisdom, which we can do, and I'm sure I have done, but a character has to exist for their own reasons. I mean, that character's purpose is not to serve her. So make sure he has a life. He has wants and dreams. I mean, make sure that you're not seeing a Black woman in this role because she's sassy. You know what I mean? Like, she can be sassy, but that shouldn't be everything about her. I think we just have to be very careful, because we've all been exposed to media, and all of us are subject to stereotyping, and we just have to be very, very careful about why a character is showing up as other in our minds. And in terms of the process question, I definitely am a polisher as I go. I pride myself in turning in very clean manuscripts, and maybe that's my journalistic training. I was a reporter for 10 years, but I think the thing of it is, sometimes forward motion is hard, like it's a kind of a fog bank, and if you're writing on a quota, which I am now because I have a book due May 1st, the way I orient myself into writing my new 4 pages or 3 pages or ever many pages I'll write today is by reading what I wrote yesterday, or reading what I wrote last Friday. And I'm buffing and shining and buffing, cutting. Oh my gosh, why am I using 3 sentences to say the same thing in this paragraph? Or why is this sentence at the end of the paragraph instead of at the beginning of the paragraph? I try to end my paragraphs on power words. And all I can say about that is it wouldn't be a word like were or at or, boring words. I'm talking about a power word. Like, so he was bored to death. Death is a power word, rather than just he was bored. Although it's also a cliche, so it's not a great example. But that's a whole workshop on power words. But I want to pull myself through my story as much as I hope to later pull the reader through my story. So I'm buffing and shining those paragraphs until the paragraph I wrote last Friday feels as polished to me as that work I've gone over from 2 months ago that I've been obsessively buffing and shining. I mean, so yeah, my way of going forward is often to go back. And especially since I'm writing in multiple point of view, going back to the last section or chapter from that character's point of view, not only to make sure that the voice is consistent and that, he's wearing the same clothes and holding the same objects and all that stuff, but just to find that carrier tone so that it feels like I'm just floating instead of typing, which is the worst. Sometimes it just feels like typing. And sometimes you're going to finish your workday feeling like everything you wrote was crap and you'll have to do it all again tomorrow. But in my case, at least 90% of the time, that voice is lying to me. And it's actually fine. It's just not edited yet. And it's not fair to compare fresh pages and fresh prose either to the writers you love that you read for pleasure, or the work you did that you polished and buffed and shined already. Just don't judge it. Let it flow. And that's my way. My husband is the opposite. He's like, wow, like tries to write the whole thing and then goes back. I don't know how. I honestly get triggered just thinking about that. But that's what he does. And it works for him.
What happens? What happens when the two of you collaborate on something?
I end up, listen, it's yeah, he's very, very good with the structure and the outline. And when we collaborate, it's absolutely necessary to have a very strong outline. If I'm going to make major changes, we're going to have a conversation about it. I mean, yeah, you can have freedom in the moment and characters will surprise you and say things you weren't expecting. But if it was supposed to end with a train crash and I decided not to do that, we have to have a conference about that. So yeah, that is kind of rough because it's opposite approaches, but I also love his structural mind. He has a great structural mind. I feel like I thrive more in finding like the little dainty, pretty words and within the paragraph. But I am an outliner. That's one thing that I really have gotten from screenwriting is that, like, even now, I made a beat sheet like to take me to the finish line. It's due May 1st. I'm thinking I might even get this in on time. I have to write this scene like a sentence, like this is going to happen, and then another sentence, and then this is going to happen from this other character's point of view, and then this is going to happen. I even made notes from the soliloquy that I want my character to make, and then just so I don't forget, I really, I guess, kind of grudgingly admire people who can just sort of pants their way through it by the seat of their pants and just find it. And it's not that that's illegitimate. I mean, there are a lot of great writers who do that. There are a lot of great writers who hate outlining. They feel like it's too constraining. There's no
Stephen King.
spontaneity in the moment. I mean, that's fine. I ain't him, you know what I mean? So for me, I really like knowing where I'm going. And most often when I get stuck, it's because I realize I don't know I don't know what's supposed to happen next. It's like, oh, this isn't writer's block. This is my lack of planning. You know, let me beat it out. Like he does this, she does this, and then boom. It doesn't have to be like paragraphs or pages, just for me, a guideline. And I would suggest that those of you who feel like you can't outline, but you've never tried it, just try a beat sheet, like just one line, even if it's just a short story. Because I've started short stories that I didn't finish, and then I come back and I have no idea where I was going with that. If only I had done like 4 little lines explaining what was supposed to happen, maybe I would have finished that short story instead of sitting in my drawer. So I would give it a shot.
Yeah, I think sometimes people get hung up with the idea of an outline because they think it has to be this incredibly detailed and organized structure. But like you're just saying, a beat sheet, that's really all you need, right? Just kind of a guideline to tell you, like, this is the way I should be going.
And by the way, feel free to ignore it too. I think a lot of times people will feel like, oh, I said I was going to do this. I feel too locked in. Well, unlock yourself. You know, if you're writing and you see it going in a different direction, unlock yourself, and then maybe beat out now where the direction is taking you. I have had characters surprise me in scenes, even within those constraints. Like, so it's the scene I said I was going to write, but he's not acting like I thought he would act. And no matter how much I tried, this character who was really an a-hole, and you're supposed to feel this real pleasure from seeing him get his in the scene. Now he's in a 12-step program. He's all apologetic. I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? But by the, you know, so there's still room for surprise. And I think we want to feel surprised when we're writing, like we do when we're reading.
I can't believe that we are at the end of our word for word session. I mean, this has gone like the blink of an eye. And
it went pretty quick. I'm just checking the comments here. Yeah, I think screenwriting is a really, really good, even if you don't want to work in Hollywood, and there are a lot of reasons not to want to work in Hollywood, but even if you don't, screenwriting is a really good thing, I think, for prose writers to teach you structure, which, you know, at least when I was in creative writing workshops, was not emphasized much at all, like story structure. And story structure is overemphasized, I would say, in screenwriting.
yeah,
So there's like a happy middle ground between the two. And then the other big reason would be visual storytelling, visual symbols, and improving that aspect of our work. Lots of stuff happening.
Yeah, we haven't been able, and we're not going to be able to answer all of these questions, unfortunately.
One thing I would say is writing, if it's coming in verse, write it in verse. I have a friend who just sold her novel in verse. There was a best-selling YA series. It was written in verse. I mean,
that's right.
Sometimes just trust what comes out. You don't have to try to contort yourself, at least not this early. A lot of you are just starting out. Figure out who you are as writers before you start reining yourselves in because you think the marketplace is going to reject you. The marketplace is also attracted to new novelty and freshness, you know. And the second thing about outlining is if you really get good at it and you can write kind of a treatment. I mean, I've sold a book based on a 30-page outline, like literally got the advance and like, oh, okay, that looks good. And if you write nonfiction, it's very common to sell a book based on a chapter and an outline, or a couple of chapters and outline. So it's just a good skill to have in a pinch. You know, you might find yourself in a situation where someone will be like, oh, that sounds interesting, tell me more about it. The ability to sort of see your story, or at least how it looks today from beginning to end, is a good skill.
Absolutely. On that note, I'm gonna with regret bring our word for word tonight to an end. I want to thank our guest, Tananarive, for sharing her work with us today. Her books are available at your local bookstore and online. And don't forget her podcast, Life Writing, which is full of writing tips and wisdom from Tananarive and her husband, Stephen Barnes. And of course, 5 lucky attendees tonight, as I mentioned earlier, will be randomly selected to receive a free copy of the Reformatory.
That's
And,
great. I love it. I approve. And also just as a note for people who see Sinners this week, and I'm a big Sinners fan, which it should not surprise anyone to hear, my husband and I are going to do a free webinar kind of breaking down why this movie is such a success, both as a story and as a strategy, and how you can replicate such strategies to bootstrap yourselves into the industry in your way. So check us out at iloveafrofuturism.com.
Here, I'm going to put that
next Tuesday at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. Completely free.
Okay, I'm putting that into the chat. There we go. I hope
Great.
that's right.
Yeah, I love afrofuturism.com. Now, don't come to it if you haven't seen the movie, because we will be spoiling the heck out of it.
So everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'll be back on Wednesday, May 15th, I'm sorry, with a special evening devoted to agents and agenting, featuring 2 top literary agents. Yes, we're going to have Joshua Bilmus with us and Lucian Diver. And
no one even mentioned agents when I was studying creative writing.
Right? So, we had to figure all that stuff out for ourselves.
I mean, am I gay? Okay. Well, everybody, thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye, everybody.